start working with stances again now and see if we can go ahead and get the rest of the stances in. The first one we're going to work with is the back bow and arrow. The back bow and arrow is identical to the bow and arrow, except that your opponent is behind you instead of in front. So when you're doing the bow and arrow, if you would do it this way, back a step. When you're practicing the bow and arrow, you shift the weight to the left leg. In the reverse bow, or back bow and arrow, it's the same position except that you turn away from your bent leg and facing the opposite direction so that your opponent is behind you. The bow and arrow, your opponent is toward the bent leg, and in the back bow and arrow, the opponent is toward the straight leg. The weight distribution is still 80% on the bent leg, 20% on the straight leg. Now in application, what you have is that the back bow and arrow is almost always a defensive stance. If he were to kick at my head, then I could use the back bow and arrow in order to be totally defensive and avoid the attack in order to get out of the way. And then I can shift back into a bow and arrow for an aggressive position. So the back bow and arrow is used defensively. The bow and arrow is used offensively. The weight distribution on the half split is 90% on the bent leg and 10% on the straight leg. The half split, if you sit down all the way on one foot, keeping the other leg straight, this is the half split. 90% of the weight here, 10% of the weight here. This is used defensively thus. Let's say he does a crescent kick, sweeping his leg toward my head, and I need to avoid the attack. From here, I can go right into the half split to avoid it, and still maintain my composure and balance in order to be able to come back and attack. And there are times when you do need to go under your opponent's attack, and you need to still maintain perfect balance. So rather than bending over, you sit right down on your leg, on your foot. Now to be offensive, I could have attacked in the same direction. When he aggresses with his crescent kick, I can go under and attack, so that the attack is still coming from the half split stance. The next stance is probably the one that we use the most, and it is the forward stance. The forward stance is used primarily as an offensive stance. To look at the forward stance, the feet are primarily like they are in the bow and arrow, except that your feet are further apart this way. If there were a line on the floor, you would be straddled the line. The left foot is turned in, the right foot is turned, and both facing about 30 degrees from this position. You want to shift the hips around so that they are straight ahead. Put your hands on your hips and notice that your elbows and your shoulders are square. The weight distribution is 30% on the bent leg, 70% on the bent leg, 30% on the straight leg. The opponent is directly in front of you, and use this as an aggressive stance. You'll note that the front leg is bent in. The knee is turned in order to protect the groin area from attack. If you stepped in with the foot straight out, then you leave your groin wide open for an attack. The person just needs to step back and attack. So we turn the foot in, turn the knee in order to protect the groin. Once again, the forward stance, weight distribution, 70, 30, hips turned around straight, shoulders squared, looking straight ahead. The feet are apart so that the front toe is in line with the back heel. If there were a line straight on the floor, you'd be straddle that line so that the toe of the front foot is on the line and the heel of the back foot is on the line. The knee should be directly out over the toe. This is the forward stance. The back is straight. The next stance that we're going to work with is called the cat stance. The cat stance is already something that you're familiar with because it is the stance that we use in the bow. We take the right foot and place it straight to your right and put the left foot directly in front so that it makes right angles. Both legs are bent. You have about 95% of the weight on the right foot and about 5% on the front leg. Hands on the hips are turned at an angle about 45 degrees. The cat stance is primarily an offensive stance, but it is used an awful lot in Kung Fu as a defensive stance. Offensively, it can be used to kick or to strike. Defensively, it is used a lot in order to back up away from your opponent and able to block. So if he were to attack with his right hand, I can step back very easily and block with the push block that we've learned in the cat stance. And then I'm in a position now for aggression or to shift into another stance for an aggressive attack. And that is the cat stance. The next stance is called the back stance. The back stance has opposite weight distribution than the forward stance in that you have 70% of the weight on the back leg. The knees are apart. You want to pull them apart as far as you can get them. Sit back on the right foot so that you've got 70% of the weight on the back leg. The hips are turned, the shoulders are turned, and you're looking straight ahead. This is the back stance. Different than the back bow and arrow. The back stance allows you to be defensive and it allows you to shift into an offensive position very quickly. For example, if he were to attack with his right, I can step back into a back stance and I'm ready to shift back into a forward stance for aggression. Whereas if I would have used the back bow and arrow, it takes me a lot longer in order to shift back into an aggressive position. The next stance is called a tiger stance. The tiger stance is very similar to the forward stance, except that we lean forward slightly in order to commit ourselves with the attack, to gain a little bit more forward momentum. The tiger stance gets the spine in line with the back leg. The hips are still turned as much as you can to the front foot is still turned in. What you're doing here is getting the forward aggression out a little bit more. This is called the tiger stance. The foot position is very similar, almost identical, to those in the forward stance. The weight distribution is a little bit different, 85% on the front and 15% on the back. Now what we want to do is to put these stances all together in a routine